Perfect. Perfect. See. All right. Good afternoon, Kelly. We're just waiting for a couple more people who RSVP'd to filter in, and then I'll let Marena take it away. I'll be keeping an eye on attendees. Thank you all for taking the time out of your day to learn a little bit more about energy efficiency, especially in regards to all sorts of issues that I know have been happening across the country with rising energy prices. I'm sure Marena will have some comments on that. Right. I'll give it one more minute.
Yeah, I think one more minute should be just fine.
Fantastic.
I hope everybody else has a mug of something warm.
I've got something cozy here myself, so.
Yeah, and I hope you guys don't mind while I have this giant mug of coffee while we talk through this.
I mean, I imagine it's doing a lot to warm you up.
It's definitely helping, but I'm going to tell everybody some other strategies to stay warm in their historic houses.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and give my little spiel. I'm sure we'll have more people filtering in as we go, but I just wanted to start by thanking everyone for finding the time to come out today. And give you a little introduction to what we're going to be talking about here today. The wonderful Marena Lewinsky is coming to us from the State Historic Preservation Office to talk about, of course, energy efficiency. She'll be covering most of this, but I also wanted to take the time to pardon me, to thank our sponsors and our donors. These are all of our business members, and of course, we are funded by this State Historic Preservation Office through the Department of Economic and Community Development. It's funds from the Community Investment Act. We really appreciate all of the support that people have given us, especially during the this end of year season, and it really means a lot that people would trust us with their funds and their time. And with that out of the way, I'm more than happy to turn this over to Marena so she can start with the actual educating.
Thanks, Violet.
No
Really appreciate
problem.
it.
I just have to let you
You
share.
mind if I share my screen?
You should be all good to go.
Awesome. All right. If everybody can see that, can they just give me a thumbs up? Thumbs up, yes?
I can see it quite
All right.
clearly.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so good evening. My name is Marena Wisniewski from the State Historic Preservation Office, and I'm here to talk about the inherent sustainability of historic properties and how we can capitalize on this to make additional gains in that energy efficiency. And you might be thinking, no, historic buildings are cold and drafty and you need to spend thousands of dollars to make them energy efficient, and I can feel draft near my windows, and I respectfully disagree. Most historic structures that were meant to be occupied by humans year-round were built to be efficient by design, and if they are maintained on a regular basis, are sustainable. And those features that contribute to the sustainability of the property can be expanded upon with modifications, most of them being low impact. Some of the modifications are marketing themselves as modern advancements in technology, but are actually reusing techniques that were employed by people 100 plus years ago. So we're going to do this presentation in three parts. The first and the fun part is I'm going to take you on a quick tour of historic properties that have inherently sustainable features. And after that, we'll move into a discussion of how we can improve on those features, and then finish with a real life case study of our statutory nonprofit partner, Preservation Connecticut, that is owned and operated by a historic organization. I have 77 slides. So there's a lot of material that I'm going to go through in a very short amount of time. It's going to be pretty much overarching and broad, but I will point you to additional resources. More on each topic can be found on SHPO's website in our guide, Energy Efficiency for Historic Houses, which we are going to update because even the short time that we have developed it within the past 5 years, we've already made leaps and bounds. And so there's also new opportunities for energy efficiency. So historically, and when I say historic, I'm really going to restrict myself to pre-1950 constructions, buildings and houses in particular. Um, because once we are post-1950, we're in a different sort of environment because people weren't that particularly concerned about energy conservation. So when we're talking about these houses in particular, they were constructed to take advantage of their environment. That includes materials and climate. In the earliest American structures, this meant different regions developing different types of housing. And in the Northeast specifically, it meant capitalizing on three main aspects: staying warm in the colder months, staying cool in the hotter months, and taking advantage of natural light. An example of keeping warm is orienting the building to the sun, allowing the maximum amount of heat to hit the greatest surface area of the building for the longest period of time. For areas where stone or brick was available, thick masonry walls allowed for the slow transfer of heat, allowing elevations to slowly absorb the heat, but to retain it for longer after the sun went down. So this is a concept that's known as thermal mass, and remember that term. As an aside, for a little self-promotion, this is the Henry Whitfield House, constructed in 1639. It is one of our 4 state museums, and it's fantastic. And although we don't think of historic houses having insulation, it did exist in certain periods of time. So if you take a look here, you'll see evidence of nogging that was used within the wall on the right. Nogging are pieces of brick that are used to fill in the cavity between framing members. And on the right is the image of Cabot's quilt, which was a trade name product made of eel grass that was meant to both insulate and deaden sound, and it's fascinating. Here's an early 20th century ad for the product from 1928, attesting to its success in both maintaining hot and cold climates. Another way to help keep warm was having small windows on elevations subject to less sun and or wind. This is an illustration of the Thomas Hooker house that used to exist in Hartford, and you can see that the windows take up very little surface area. A major factor for keeping warm in cold climates, and some of you may have yours on right now, is the use of a centered chimney. We see these everywhere in Connecticut, and a lot of people see them as being quintessential part of a Connecticut home. The purpose of the centered chimney was to allow a single heat source to be used to heat the entire structure, with fireplaces radiating out from the center stack. A more aggressive strategy that it's made its way to our modern house climate system is not heating rooms when they aren't in use. Today we use multiple thermostats and monitoring software using our phones. But in the past, rooms that were not often used during certain seasons were able to be partitioned off and conserving heat by requiring less square footage to be heated. Another characteristic that helped keep rooms warm was typical low ceilings. Um, pop quiz question. Does hot air rise or fall? You can give a thumbs up because that's the answer. It rises. So if the ceiling were higher, the hot air would travel up to the upper portions of the room and away from the occupants. Low ceilings also help to create a smaller space for the air to circulate. In colder months, temporary physical barriers were employed to keep wind and the cold out. Some were core permanent measures, such as interior shutters. Others, like curtains and portieres, could be opened and closed as the room was used and was often incorporated into the decor of spaces. Portieres are very much like curtains, except they're just for doors. Uh, all right, so as the second major concept, keeping cool. And you're going to say, hey, we just saw this. We did. It's the Whitfield House, and we used it to demonstrate the concept of thermal mass. Thermal mass can work both ways. It can keep cold air out when it heats up, but it can also keep cool air in because of the slow transfer of heat from that exterior to the interior. So another strategy, using landscape to your advantage. Deciduous tree leaves provide shade in warmer months and allow for sun when they shed their leaves in winter. Porches allowed for cool outdoor living spaces when interior spaces became too hot. Large porches allowed for full meals to be enjoyed and the potential for breezes and shade. And another type of porch, the sleeping porch, taking advantage of the cool night temperatures. Again, temporary features were employed for hot seasons, and they often found their way into the decor scheme of a house. A very effective feature to help cool homes is the concept of the double hung window. They are called double hung because each sash can operate independently of one another. And when you raise the lower sash and you lower the upper sash, that hot air rises to the ceiling and will be drawn out of the top sash while the cooler outside air will be drawn in to the lower sash. And in speaking of hot air rising, a specific effect known as the chimney effect draws hot air up when there is a tall, narrow channel for it to travel, such as monitors and towers, and these help to draw out that hot air. Opposite closing off rooms to conserve heat, opening them up allows for the air to flow freely. A central open hall allowed for the air to flow through the floor plan. Here's another example of open flow, which the curtains flung open to allow the air to pass. Transoms also help to cool individual spaces. Again, that hot air will rise and make its way out. And the opposite condition that retains heat, high ceilings allow for warm air to move up and away from occupants. You'll notice that this is a kitchen where that is working because kitchens often became very hot. And so if we got into summer and you were in a very hot kitchen, it was advantageous to try and have that high ceiling to draw that heat away from you. Or another option, if it was possible and the owner had the means, the main kitchen would be used in the cold weather and moved to either the basement or to an appropriately named summer kitchen located in a different building during those hotter months. And the last item, light. Light was a precious commodity with artificial light generally poor, relying on candles and later lamps. So rather than use artificial light during the daytime, homes were constructed with windows, placed to take advantage of natural light as much as possible, with early houses oriented towards the sun. So we looked at this picture to demonstrate how to keep warm, but positioning the building towards the sun also allowed for maximum sunlight to penetrate the interior. Sometimes a room function was dictated by the amount of light that it penetrated, that was able to penetrate. So an example is the Adam Stanton house in Clinton, which had a specific sewing room that was oriented towards the sun. As technology progressed, larger panes of glass were able to be manufactured, which meant that windows could also become larger. So for spaces where even greater amounts of light were desired, bay windows provided multiple angles of light. So we just went over all these inherent energy efficient features that many historic homes possess. So how do we make a house more efficient? Well, we'll need a plan. And in order to create that plan, we need to set out some goals. So any building, old or new, is a system. The parts all work together, sometimes effectively, sometimes ineffectively. It's important to remember this when you're thinking about what it is you want to accomplish by making your building more efficient. These are some of the more common goals people consider when making their building efficient. The number one goal for most people is to lower their energy costs, which happens by reducing the amount of energy expended. In a house built prior to 1950, it's generally possible to improve energy efficiency by 30 to 40%, which essentially makes it as efficient as a conventional house that was built after the year 2000. Another is simply the idea of using existing resources to reduce the amount of waste that ends up in landfills. It takes approximately 20 to 30 years for a new building to compensate for the energy expended for its construction. Most historic buildings have already expended that several times over. And for some people, the goal is for improving their energy efficiency, which includes keeping characteristics of their house that they love. Windows, doors, shutters, radiators, things that they may have been told would need to be replaced in order to make the house more green, which is simply not the case. So there are many ways to go about improving efficiency in the home. There's a lot of information offered. For historic homes, the goal is to improve the efficiency while maintaining a home's historic integrity. And that's a very, very specific term. As each resource is unique, it's important to know your home before you prescribe any sort of treatment or modification. So, what's your resource? As we all know, historic properties come in many varieties, exhibiting different character-defining features. Something is character-defining, a National Park Service term, if it is a visual aspect or physical feature that comprises the appearance of a historic building. Character-defining elements include the overall shape of a building, its materials, its craftsmanship, its decorative detail, interior spaces, and features, as well as can include various aspects of its site and its environment. So this is a photo of 14 Charter Oak Place, which is a contributing resource to the National Register listed Charter Oak Place Historic District in Hartford. It's a 2.5-story frame house that was built in 1876 for Charles H. Northam, who happened to be a flour merchant. So based on this photo, some character defining features that we can shout out just quick: Gothic tower, bay windows, clapboard siding, barge board with brackets. These are all things that are considered character defining for this property and contribute to its historic integrity. So as you may have kind of noticed when we walk through those examples of all those historic properties, some character defining features are historically important, and they also contribute to a home's passive efficiency. So examples that we've seen: shutters, um, uh, deep covered porches. I didn't mention it previously, but steep, dark colored roofs with little overhang. That's very characteristic of many 18th century New England houses because of their ability to effectively shed snow and attract heat for warmth. As fuel was an ever-pressing concern for people who had previously been accustomed to mostly rainy winters, homes were designed to maximize heat retention from the roofline to the plan, which you can see here. So we have that central heat source described in those 3 rooms. And the vestibule, which you'll also see here that I didn't get a chance to discuss, the vestibule was also a tool of temperature regulation as it was an intermediary space between outside and inside. The siding of a residence, as I kind of alluded to when I was talking about deciduous trees, and the treatment of the lot is important. Northern elevations, few windows, planted with coniferous trees to protect against northern winds in winter. Southern elevations, more windows, deciduous trees. Shaded the house in summer, solar heat in winter. So with these features, it is very possible to improve a building's energy efficiency by building on them. And when new interventions need to be introduced, some of the most effective energy improvement techniques can be done and are reversible and are relatively inexpensive. And like I said, before making any changes, we need to know our resource and we need a baseline to compare those changes to see how effective they will be. And a good place to start is to schedule an energy audit. Part of the energy assessment will be a blower door diagnostic test, which will depressurize the house and help determine where air and energy is being lost. It's also important to prepare an energy audit. It's important to prepare for an energy audit ahead of time, as it will include the entirety of the house, attic to basement. So when you do that, let's keep the following things in mind. So most of the stuff here is because of the blower door test, and it's meant to prevent anything hazardous from being circulated throughout the house. The technician that comes to do the audit will also ask questions to help determine any specific areas of concern you may have. And so you want to familiarize with yourself with things like the year your house was built, the total square footage it has, the age of the appliances and the utilities, and if you happen to notice any cold or hot spots. And then again, these are more suggestions to prepare. Okay, easy to do. I call these sitcom dadisms. So usually the results of an energy audit offer some immediate, simple ways to improve energy efficiency. And one that is the easiest first step is to replace incandescent light bulbs with LEDs. I think most people have moved that because it's really hard to find incandescent light bulbs these days. I went to go find one because I needed it for a very specific light, and I could not find one, so I had to order it. So even in homes where lighting may play an important part to the feeling of spaces, light technology has come so far that you can, of course, choose from a variety of brightness settings and color temperatures, even from a single bulb. Some of you may have those apps where you can change the color temperature of the light depending on your mood. There's all kinds of ways you can do it. Another easy option is to conserve electricity by turning things off when they're not in use or installing timers. Also to regulate the thermostats by reducing the heating and cooling by a degree or two, or programming thermostats for when you are home and when you aren't. For plumbing, fixing leaks and insulating pipes are some of the easiest methods to eliminate energy waste. They actually account leaky pipes, non-insulated pipes, and leaky drip pipes account for an awful lot of waste than most people would realize. But once a baseline is established, an owner can begin to plan for interventions through a variety of methods. I'm going to go quickly through all these types of methods and point out ways that you can improve the efficiency on your own, and then we'll see some treatments that require professional assistance. So the first one is air sealing. Correcting air leaks provides some of the greatest returns on investment. It's inexpensive and, if done correctly, reversible. Air leaks can account for anywhere between 5 and 40% of heating and cooling costs, so it's very important to detect where air is entering and exiting. The blower door test, as part of the audit, detects air leaks, but the homeowner can also test for leaks themselves using a candle or a smoke test. Usually, air leaks are found in the following areas. So corners, outdoor faucets, joints, joints between the foundation and siding materials, joint between the siding and the chimneys, and door and window frames. And then, of course, there's a larger list for interior. Similar sort of thing. There's a lot of places where there could be air gaps that you don't think about, things like cable TV and phone line connections, because they often don't seal those. Once they drill the hole, they usually just run the cable, and there you go. There's no caulk or anything like that after. Um, so when sealing air leaks, the type of material you choose to do it is important. The goal is to have it be reversible for historic property. Latex caulking is often the most inexpensive and user-friendly option, and as a bonus, you can paint it to have it match the adjacent material. Sometimes you will have people suggest spray foam. It is not recommended for historic properties. It is not preservation friendly. It has to be mechanically and chemically removed. It can stain, so even if you are able to remove the actual material, it may leave a stain. It does off gas, and it can also mask other problems like mold, which can grow around it. Usually the most effective areas to seal right away are the attic and the basement. Those are places where the majority of air enters and leaves the house. Other places to seal are around windows and doors. That can be accomplished with things like weather stripping, and I will talk about that when I discuss windows. And it's also important to remember that the goal is to reduce the amount of air infiltration while allowing the house to breathe as it was designed to, because we want to avoid accumulating moisture. So we want to make sure that we have air flowing, but we're dampening, to avoid the pun. We want to make sure that we're not completely hermetically sealing off the environment because we don't want the opportunity for moisture to collect. We want it to flow as it was originally designed. Insulation. Insulation is a tricky subject. There will be cases where it's extremely valuable, and there will be cases where it can be extremely damaging while on top of not being effective. So what is the goal of insulation? The purpose of insulation is to slow down the transfer of heat. It's trying to replicate the concept of thermal mass. So most houses were not insulated prior to 1940, and if they were, it was with things like I showed you, like brick nogging, or sometimes if you've ever done a renovation in your historic home, you'll find newspaper just somewhere in there, and it was meant to provide some sort of material in between. Insulation is commonly rated by an R factor, the resistance to transferring heat. So the higher the number, the better it insulates. As with air leaks, there are areas within historic homes that are good places to start your insulation. And in many places, and in many historic homes, you may have seen that those places were already insulated. For instance, the basement, the attic, pipes, and ducts. The benefit of starting here is that these are all typically places where no historic finishes need to be disturbed to install the insulation. But there are a variety of insulation materials to choose from, each with different R values and different applications. As with air sealing, spray foams are not reversible and should not be used on historic fabric. Also, like air sealing, there's that question of moisture buildup when insulating the structure. As heat is not passing as easily through the structure, exterior materials may remain colder and wetter for longer, which may lead to more maintenance and/or deterioration, which is why it's really important for us to know a baseline before you start making interventions. So if you start to notice conditions that weren't there before, it's easy for you to find the reason why um, that new condition is happening. The question of wall insulation in a historic home is a bit problematic as something has to be removed to allow for the insulation. And this varies widely. It could be, depending, could be a little small cut into plaster, removing of exterior shingle, or not recommended, a whole-scale removal of wall finishes. If too much insulation is added to an existing wall cavity, plaster wall systems can sometimes fail, evidenced by broken keys or lath. And additionally, wood frame structures often contain a wall cavity that helps keep that interior wall system dry. So adding insulation without a proper vapor barrier can sometimes cause unintentional moisture problems and rot. In the case of masonry structures, again, that wall insulation can keep materials wetter for longer. That can also sometimes create similar moisture problems or material deterioration, sometimes as mortar, mortar getting washed out from joints or something like that. All right, my favorite part. And it's the one we always get the questions on. Windows. Windows are the eyes to the soul of a building. You can learn a lot about that building in a very short period of time by looking at those windows. They hold cultural value, but they also have a number of practical benefits. So they are often made of quality materials by a quality craftsman. I don't want to get to the joke first. They are repairable multiple times. They are custom made for your house, and they provide aesthetic quality that new windows simply just can't. So if all this is true, why do so many houses have replacement windows? So much like the aluminum siding salesman would walk down the street going door to door, I'm sure you have seen window salesmen doing the same thing today. And they come with a great pitch. First, they try and make you feel bad that your windows look shabby. Then they try and tell you that it's not efficient, they're not energy efficient. Then they tell you that they're not aesthetically appealing. And then they tell you that the windows are approved by the local historic commission. And that one always gets me. It's one of the reasons we do this presentation. So this type of sales pitch contributes to the number of homes that have replacement windows. The statements sound reasonable. They're approaching you with what they are saying is science. And then they tell you that they're approved by the local historic district commission, and that sounds really good because they're historic preservation people. They wouldn't let you replace windows if it wasn't a good thing, right? So here's some statements to counter that. So they may not be new, but they work just fine. As far as the energy efficiency, a properly weatherized window with a storm functions like a new insulated window. Aluminum storms are effective and they do not require any major investment if they are already there. They are already environmentally friendly and they protect the historic window. And a very long response, which I've actually given to a window salesman, is new windows are not the same quality of original windows. The wood that they are made out of is less dense. They provide comparable energy efficiency to the existing windows at a significant cost. Each unit has a finite lifespan and is not repairable of your replacement windows. And your replacement windows are not custom made to match existing windows in material, configuration, size, and muntin profile as recommended by the National Park Service. And so replacing those windows are going to negatively affect the integrity of my National Register property. And to sum it up, your replacement windows are inferior to the ones I already have. So replacement windows are the last resort. They are there to replace what's been lost. So if you have windows that are in good shape or windows that are in need of repair, there really is no need to replace them. And the idea of replacing windows to be more sustainable isn't all that effective. A single pane double hung wood window has an approximate R value of 1. A double pane insulated double hung window has an R value of 3. Adding a storm window to your historic window brings that R value up to 2. And if you really feel like completely closing that gap of energy efficiency, adding an interior storm will make it the same value. So there have been additional studies on windows, particularly when it comes to air infiltration and heat transfer. And I want to plug a book that's actually I wanted to plug a book that is pretty accessible, if you can see it. And there's a picture up there. It's a quick read, it's pretty small, and it's called The Case for Historic Windows by Scott Seidler and Stacy Grinsfelder. It just came out this year. And if you don't want to read it or you're busy, there is an episode on a podcast called True Tales from Old Houses. And it's episode 168, and it's a conversation with the authors if you want to listen to it. So, one of the main benefits, as I was talking about, to retaining those historic windows is that practicality of repair. Almost any element can be fixed. Contemporary windows, new replacement windows, are units. That is, they are a closed system, and once that closed system is damaged, it is almost impossible to repair that, and you have to pay for a new unit. So for things like you may, if you know somebody or if you've seen windows and you've had, insulated windows, and you'll notice that there's some sort of condensation that forms in between those panes of insulated glass. That's because the gas that was put in there to act as the insulation has failed. And you could theoretically fill it again with new gas, but the cost of doing that and the ability of finding someone to doing that makes it cost prohibitive. And so that whole thing just goes into a landfill, it goes into the garbage, and you have to buy a new unit. And as I kind of mentioned, windows are almost always character defining features of a building. They are emblematic of the period the building was built, the style it was built, by whom it was built, and they're incredibly important. This is just a representative of all different types of historic windows that you can see. This is a great list of 10 reasons why it's a good idea to keep historic windows. I'm not going to read them all, but the highlights are they're more economical, you get a better return on investment over time, they're greener, they're functional, and they're absolutely unique. So the rehabilitation and repair of windows will often require the help of a skilled professional. But what you can do to immediately improve energy efficiency of your windows are things like window draft stoppers, insulated shades or curtains, rope caulk, or window draft shields. And none of these require any skill to do. General maintenance goes a long way, and this is where we're going, where it requires, so those that require no skill whatsoever, here's something that requires a little bit of skill. Painting wood sashes, spot filling glazing putty, keeping your sashes sliding smoothly, and monitoring the sash cords to replace them as necessary, because once they start to fray, you've lost your weight, and then you have to go fishing around in your wall to find it and to get it back. Some of these you may feel comfortable doing yourself, and some of you may not. But that's okay. It's important to keep them on your radar as part of a general home checklist. You clean out the gutters every fall, check your windows at the same time. More intensive energy efficient measures that can be undertaken by a professional are metal weather stripping, very nice. Storm windows, also very nice. Both of these items need to be custom fitted for the best results, so it's a good idea to get someone experienced. Our nonprofit partner, Preservation Connecticut, has a directory of professionals that are sorted by category, if you are in the market for this type of work. Similar to windows, doors are incredibly important and character defining features. The same reasons for keeping historic windows apply to the doors. Better material, custom fit, less waste, completely unique to your house. And people are also going to suggest you replace them. That's an actual mailer I got. That looks nothing like the door that I have, by the way. It's not even close. So the same treatments for windows are similar for doors and include things like regular maintenance, painting and patching, insulation and weather stripping. There's the option of a storm door. And you just want to be careful when you choose a storm door that you try not to distract from the historic door. But again, if your goal is I really just want to keep it, what I can do right now is I just want to keep my home, resistant to some of that cold air coming in the winter. Um, the addition of a storm door is reversible and it doesn't adversely impact your house, and it also does the added benefit of protecting your historic door. HVAC. So I talked earlier about the inherent energy saving features that were built into historic homes because fuel sources weren't as plentiful and modern cooling didn't exist. Now that these systems do exist, many people have grown accustomed to them. Given also the discussion we had a little bit earlier about insulation and moisture, we also want to be cognizant of the idea that we don't want to create an interior space in July that's say 50 degrees when it's 90 degrees outside. And I used to say in this presentation that is hyperbole, but it's not hyperbole anymore in July. We've had days where it's 100 degrees and people are in their homes and they would like their home to be 60 degrees. Um, but the principle remains the same. It's possible to create climate-controlled spaces in historic homes, but much like when we talked about air sealing, it's unrealistic and it's undesirable to expect to create a hermetically sealed environment of a historic home with new HVAC. What should be desired and expected is to integrate a system into a home by using the inherent climate control characteristics that we talked about, coupled with new technology or systems that can be easily swapped out when they become obsolete because they will become obsolete. Everybody, HVAC systems, I know, are a huge investment, but it's always important to recognize that they will need to be replaced. So things like installing new pipes or ductwork should be avoided if you already have infrastructure that you can use. So an example, the furnace that's shown is a natural gas furnace hot water heater combo unit, which is connected to the existing radiators that are in the house. That's my house. So maybe you can hear my radiator. That's my radiator. And it's connected to that furnace combo system. So the only major change here when they did this conversion was to remove the oil furnace and hook up and the conventional hot water tank and hook up this new system. In regards to cooling, which is where we got a lot of questions because air conditioning was not usually built into many historic homes, where there is no existing ductwork, high velocity mini ducts are an option. They're smaller and flexible compared to traditional box metal ductwork, and they require less intervention in historic fabric. And so you could usually place them in places like closets. They can actually fit in between wall cavities. And it's a great option if you're looking to do a really hard set built-in air conditioning. But if you are interested in seasonal cooling, where you're only cooling from the months from June to maybe the middle of September, where there is no room air conditioners, which vent out through a small hose or window, are more effective at cooling smaller spaces, and they don't do any damage to historic fabric. Um, they're the ones that I'm talking about are they're room units, which are on wheels, which you can actually roll them around. Standard window units are fine, but you usually need to provide a little padding because some of those times those units are real heavy and you're having them hang out the window, so they might be pushing on the windowsill a little bit. But the room units are great, and kind of as we talked about, you're saving energy by not cooling the entirety of the house. So let's say if you're the type of person who, you spend the majority of your time in two rooms because you're out and about and doing whatever, it may make sense to do room units in those. But if you are the type of person who's like, hey, listen, I use every single room in my house all the time, 24 hours a day, it may be an option for you to explore things like high velocity mini ducts. Okay, so all of this is about conserving energy. I told you all about things about how we can reduce the energy uses. So now let's talk about alternative sources to creating energy, to producing energy. So solar. A significant question when it comes to energy efficiency is the introduction of solar. Solar has its detractors and supporters. A typical residential solar installation relies on solar voltaic panels that are usually installed on a roof, but they can also be installed on a ground-mounted solar array. Solar installations have the possibility to negatively impact above ground and below ground resources, and so therefore, placement is key. General guidance is that the panels, if installed on buildings, should be placed on a non-public facing slope, usually either on the side or the rear, or placed on a non-historic structure if the property has an addition, or a non-historic outbuilding if there's a new garage. For ground-mounted arrays, they should be placed in an area that will not disrupt a scenic view, and the area, if not already disturbed, should be evaluated for its potential to contain archaeological deposits. That's a little unusual when we're talking about residential development, but there are places, especially things like historic farms, historic farmsteads with fields and fields and fields, and it may have been an area that's sensitive for archaeology, where you want to just make sure that you're not disturbing anything by the installation. Geothermal heat pumps are another possible option for renewable energy. They rely on the Earth's constant temperature for heating and use less energy than conventional furnace systems. Like ground-mounted solar arrays, the area of installation should be evaluated for archaeological sensitivity before installation. This used to be unusual, but in the past few years, is what I mean about technology advancing and changing all the time. This has now become a more realistic option for many people. Some communities, will band together and they'll have one big geothermal field installed that actually serves multiple properties. We are working on one right now for the Henry Whitfield Museum, which is really exciting because it's a 1639 building and it's a highly archaeologically sensitive site. So we are looking, we've done all the surveys and we are selecting a site to install this system to reduce the energy consumption at our museum. Other sources. So there are other types of renewable energy that include things like wind power, hydropower, biomass fuels. They're typically outside the realm of a single homeowner, but we do include them in the guide so you can kind of have some information on each type. Again, it's for most people, it's out of their realm. Some people, absolutely. I have not personally met someone, but in our office, I believe it's somewhere out in the northeast corner where they have their own dam that's on their property, and it's a small dam, but they've converted it into making hydropower, and it's enough to power their home. So, which is pretty great. I know that there's also a very small wind turbine in New Haven that serves a school. So it's not impossible. You just have to be a little creative about it. And then this is just a case study. You've already seen a picture of this when we were talking about solar panels. So this is a property that went through this process that I just described. And then, so I'm just going to walk through it pretty real quickly. Um, so this is the Eli Whitney boarding house. It is the headquarters of Preservation Connecticut. There is a historic photo before Preservation Connecticut undertook a restoration. So it's a boarding house for the Eli Whitney Gun Factory from 1827, which is across the street. It was listed on the National Register in 1974, and in 1989, the Connecticut Trust for Historic Preservation purchased the property. They were interested in lowering their energy costs, so they had an energy audit conducted in 2008, and they came back with some suggestions from the audit that they then evaluated against the historic integrity of their property and what they could implement pretty easily and what they decided would negatively impact their property, and they decided that they weren't going to go for it. Um, so these numbers are money that saved them every year. Um, and so a lot of them were pretty easy to do. So a high efficiency air conditioning unit, adding storm windows, insulating the basement ceiling. And then they did decide to go with the blown-in cellulose of insulation. In addition to adding insulation board to the attic and the basement, insulating the hot water tank, you'll notice that these are all the things that I just went through about. These are easy things that you can do to insulate, and these are the common places that you start first. Reducing the hot water temperature to 120 degrees. And all of these little things add up. The biggest one that they decided that they didn't want to go with was to insulate with spray foam, which the possibility was in order to do that, they would remove all the plaster and replace it with gypsum board and insulate it with spray foam. And they decided not to do that. They went with an alternative, which was to actually insulate the exterior walls with blown-in insulation instead. And then they also did some other measures, caulking, insulate the fireplace dampeners, caulking along the baseboards, around the windows and doors, and then between the floors where the pipes enter the building. And you can see some images here where they're doing, heat photography, so you can see where cold spots are. And then the biggest investment that they ended up doing was the solar panels. Um, so they did everything else first, and capitalizing on all the existing features that they could, and then they augmented that with new technology. Um, so, and then they evaluated what the impacts would be. They have the benefit of the house being gable end to the street. So placing those panels, especially because they were so low profile on that side slope, really does not detract from the visual aspect of the building when viewed from the public right of way. And it's also reversible. So that was the way that they decided to go. And they made some very specific choices. They obviously decided that ripping out all of the floor, ripping out all of the wall finishes and installing spray foam insulation was something that they did not want to do. So they did everything else that they wanted to do while making the property more efficient, and then they augmented that with the addition of solar panels, which, while it was something new and not historic, was reversible and didn't detract from that historic integrity. So that's how they decided to approach it. Um, and I think that's a good place to start the summary of it's important to remember that the name of the game when it comes to energy improvements and interventions is reversibility. Because technology is ever evolving, and elements introduced into a structure may soon become obsolete and need to be removed or cause unforeseen conditions. This is true both for the impact to the building and for the people who live and work in them. So when we discuss new additions, we want to make sure we avoid those character-defining features where we can and utilize materials and methods that have a proven performance record or that can be reversed. So you'll see that the top photo here, this is a building that was a historic school, and you'll see that they've cut holes for air conditioning units below the windows. Um, and those are for very specific grades. And we know that air conditioning units don't last forever. So eventually those are going to have to be replaced and they're not going to fit. And those holes were cut for very specific units. And so it's not going to fit. And the below photo is a product that was marketed as being energy efficient and super comfortable, and it was asbestos, which we now know is incredibly poisonous. And so everybody who had that installed had to have it abated. So this is an example of the original furnace that's in the Lockwood Matthews Mansion in Norwalk, which was built in 1864. Many homes were built with this type of furnace in the late 19th century. It is no longer used, so they decided to use it as part of their interpretation of the museum. So this is the space in my home where the coal and later oil furnace was, obviously much smaller than Lockwood's, and this is the photo of my current furnace. This is in my basement, which is a utilitarian space, which has no character defining features present here. My house is also not a museum, and it's not a giant mansion where the question of how did they heat this thing is asked by any visitors. So the change in furnace from oil to gas did not negatively affect any of the historic features of my home. Uh, so this is a church in Hartford, um, where you can see they had very large units for air conditioning. And they decided that the easiest way to do that was to have this big giant ductwork. I can't see all the cuts that were made in the masonry, but I can't see the ones at the top. And it also looks like that they removed some windows in order to get these vents into the building. Here's another great example. This is from the National Park Service about, again, insensitive interventions. These cuts are made for very specific units and they wear out. What replaces them? Do you make another intervention? What if it's bigger or smaller? How do you fix this? You can't put it back. You can't put that panel underneath that window with that neoclassical relief carving is gone and it's been lost for the sake of a 30-year appliance. And I'm being generous about how long that unit is going to last. So, as a steward of a historic property, I enjoy my house, but I also have a responsibility to take care of it, just like you have a responsibility to take care of yours. And as part of that responsibility, it's important to make sure that the changes you make, whether it is to save money or provide a better comfort for you or people who come and stay with you, do not negatively impact the building. So, before embarking on those energy upgrades, remember the following. Decide what you want to accomplish, understand the character of your home, evaluate those current conditions, and create a holistic plan that is primarily reversible. So there are plenty of resources to help you with specific projects. I do want to highlight one source, which is Sustainable CT, which takes into account historic preservation when it evaluates the sustainability of communities. Um, I wanted to kind of talk about it a little bit because they do have opportunities for nonprofits and for groups to get together. They have a matching grant program that provides flexible funding. And it's a great program that incorporates all sorts of aspects of sustainability, but makes a point to recognize how historic preservation plays a role in that in communities. These are a list of resources that are, very quick, and I'm happy to share this presentation with Violet. So you have these, you have these links. Um, and there's much more to read about sustainability in our handbook. You can find it on our website, additional guidance from the National Park Service. And this is just a jumping off point. And thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to help to answer them.
Thank you very much, Marina. I actually did have a quick question, which is when it comes to living in buildings that were converted from structures that weren't intended to be residential, do you have any tips, tricks, or recommendations?
Typically, the same principles apply. We're
Mhm.
establishing a baseline of what energy you're expending and where you can make those interventions that are reversible. I'm guessing you're thinking more along the lines of like factory buildings or things like that, which have been very successful in their conversions into living units. Oftentimes, those actually work really well because when you partition them off into smaller individual units, um, you can often install new HVAC systems that are specific to those units, which are smaller and much more energy efficient. The same principles about windows, big giant windows. Um, Big giant windows, they can be rehabbed. Big steel stash windows can be rehabbed. Installing interior storms on those helps to create that thermal barrier. And especially if you're creating you're creating an interior climate environment, putting an interior storm there helps to create that climate environment of those kind of smaller units. But it's generally the same sort of principles. Find places where you can insulate and try to avoid making direct impacts to historic fabric because, that building was an industrial building. Now it's a housing building. In 100 years, we may be having an industrial building shortage, and that building may go back to being an industrial building. So we want to be as light in our touch as possible and make sure that those interventions, we can reconfigure that, but we still retain that historic integrity regardless.
Absolutely, thank you. I'm not sure if anyone else has questions.
CT energy audit, I think that the state offers, right? In my 1885 house, and they suggested, and they took images inside the walls for insulation. But I'm still confused about what is they would do blow-in insulation and they would punch holes in the walls, and I have plaster walls, so I did not go with that. Could you kind of advise about that? Is it worth it?
So it all depends on your actual resource. So when they did the audit, they did present you the type of, the work that they would do, but they should also kind of break down as really where those savings would be. So the audit would say, if you replace your furnace, you can expect, and as you saw,
No, none of that. It was only the wall insulation.
that's
I,
all
I,
that they
I have
offer.
Well, I
Yeah,
mean,
go
there
ahead.
were, insulate the ventilation stuff. My furnace is good. I don't need to replace that. It was really, I think the main thing would be insulate the walls. And
So it
I am worried because I have plaster walls. I don't really want
Mhm,
holes all along
mhm.
that. And I don't know how different, you talk about foam insulation. Would that be what they'd put in there? I don't know.
No, so they would put in typically what they would do is they would do a blown-in insulation. There are different options to do it since you would be insulating the exterior walls, and you would need to talk to the insulation installer, and you kind of want to come armed with your background knowledge of, I have a historic home, my plaster walls are intact, and I don't want to make interventions with them. If you have the possibility of removing a clapboard or an exterior shingle or or a piece of exterior trim and using that to blow in the insulation, there's an opportunity to do that rather than touching the walls themselves. It would not be spray foam insulation. Spray foam insulation cannot be removed. So typically what they would do, there's a way to do it where it's blown in insulation and it's actually retrievable because the thing about, remember I'm saying things have finite lifespans, these interventions, what happens with the insulation is it becomes damp and it eventually sinks in the wall. So then what you have after a certain number of years is you will have, and you can have, and if you have, let's say, a leaky roof or you have something where moisture can collect, you'll end up with this sort of layer of wet insulation that sits in the lower portion of the exterior wall, which can lead to things like moisture problems and rot. So you want to make sure that the person you select to help you do that insulation project. If the insulation project is really what you feel like, listen, this is going to save me, $1,200 every month, which, that's a hyperbole, but $1,200 a year and that $1,200 a year is really worth it to me. I need to do this. You need to work with your installer, and they have abilities where they put it in this kind of like net, so you can actually retrieve the insulation once it's been blown in. But again, it's important to recognize that whatever you put in there, um, you know, it's not going to last forever.
Sounds like
So
it's better to not do anything, which is what I
well,
decided.
no, and it could, listen, it might end up being a payoff for you. We have seen people, and Preservation Connecticut did the blown-in insulation. They did not make a cut within their plaster walls. They blew it in from the exterior. So you can do that because it's much easier to remove a piece of siding than it is to make the intervention in the plaster wall, which is a single uniform system.
Ah, okay, thank you.
I wanted to ask, this is Maggie. I live in a 100-year-old house here in New London. I wanted to ask about insulating the basement ceiling, and I'm sorry I joined a little late. If you spoke about that already, I can wait and watch the recording.
No, I'll just yeah, insulating the basement ceiling is excellent. Excellent
So
option.
how
Um,
what's the technique? Is it like, because I have the basement ceiling at my house is like a wood lath and plaster, and it's kind of crumbling and falling apart. And like you said, it's utilitarian space. It's not really part of the integrity of the historic character of the house. So would it be just like taking that whole ceiling off and insulating, or?
It's interesting that the ceiling is wood lath and plaster. Typically in a utilitarian basement, you just have the floor joists and the flooring framing above. So what often
Mm,
gets done is similar in an attic, where you basically can put in batt insulation, or you can do a combination of rigid board insulation right up against the
right,
flooring material, and then
right.
you put the batt insulation because you're stacking that R value when you do it.
Sure,
That's
sure.
interesting about the plaster and the lath.
I live in a
Um,
fancy old New London house that has all sorts of quirky things about it.
If you want to send some photos, we're always happy to provide technical
Okay.
advice. I'd want to look at it a little bit more carefully. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, happy to. That's the general principle. The other thing that you may not have heard is um sealing the joist, sealing where the sill comes in with the foundation.
Hmm.
Doing some air sealing measures with caulk.
Okay.
That's actually a really great way to help start with that. So if you have your sill and your foundation, just using a standard caulk, you can actually do that, and that will help with keeping the air getting drawn into your basement. So that's a good place to start too, the combination of air sealing and then the insulation in both places, like the basement and the attic.
What's
That's where our big main energy losses are.
okay. It's interesting. I mean, our basement is actually the warmest room in the house because that's where the
Where the
heater
furnace
is
is.
and everything.
Because
Yeah, yeah.
that's where the furnace is.
Um,
It's very comfortable.
Yeah, so I joined just as you were talking about storm windows, and like that's something that I'm actually hoping to do this coming year. So that looks like one of the bigger savings other than spray foam on this list. So I'm excited to learn more about that.
Yes, yes. I would caution against using spray foam because it requires
Oh
chemical and
yeah, no,
mechanical
I'm not.
means.
No, I heard you. I heard you talking about that part. I'm not planning to. I'm just saying on this list here, in terms of like
Yeah.
looking at energy savings and the financial savings that storm windows actually
Yes.
is. so
And
helpful.
And I would say if you have a designated property, and this is your primary residence, I would recommend you look into our Historic Homes Rehabilitation Tax Credit. That provides tax credits to homeowners who their main residence in a building that is four or less units. They can get
Mm,
a 30% return on investments that they make in their properties, which includes
yeah.
things like energy efficiency. So I highly recommend you check out our website, and that goes for everybody on the call. Just to, it's our one of our programs that helps people maintain their historic properties.
Yeah, thank you. I've been able to take some advantage of that.
You can do it again.
Okay.
There's no limit. You can do it again.
Okay. I will. I actually I replace I have this is trying I have unique windows and had one floor restored last year, and I'm looking forward to having the second floor restored this year. So and then
Um,
and adding storm windows too.
and yes, adding storms too. It really does provide. It does provide a measure, a really great way to protect the windows. So it protects your investment on restoring them in the first place, but also providing that thermal break.
If no one else is going to ask another question, I'm curious, like the window insulated curtains and shades,
Yeah,
are there good ones out there? I don't know.
yeah. I mean, that's a matter of personal taste. But they absolutely work. I can tell you, from personal experience, I have not had the opportunity yet to restore my windows, my personal windows. I have 1970s triple track aluminum storms, which are doing their job of keeping my windows protected. They need to be re-weatherized. But I use blackout curtains, that are those heavy sort of curtains. Historically, these types of curtains that kept, cold air out were just really heavy draperies,
Hmm.
and portieres. And so it's really just a matter of personal taste. And I mean, if you do a quick search for like, if you do a quick search for thermal curtains or things like that, they just look like regular curtains, and then they have a thicker backing on them. And if you're crafty enough, you can make your own. Where, if you're like, hey, listen, this is very important aesthetic for me, and you want to, choose curtains that look aesthetically pleasing, you can of course just add a backing. And even something like wool, which is a great thermal resistant and keeps you warm. I mean, that's why we wear wool coats. Same sort of principle.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just going to pitch in here. It's actually, I think, hard to find quality, kind of vintage like curtains that fit with the aesthetics of the house. I finally have gotten to sew my own, but and they're hugely expensive. So I do empathize with that. I think it is hard to find a good that is, they're very expensive, and you can find them out of New York City and things like that, but it's hard to find them that they fit with the aesthetics. They aren't modern type of curtains. Anyways, just wanted to comment on that.
No, I appreciate that. And that is a very personal aesthetic choice. So the idea of, finding some fabric that you like and having drapes made, and then adding that additional layer of fabric in between, typically some sort of wool-based fabric. You can do that if you want to make the investment in that. Um, I've got some just really heavy, very heavy drapery, with a backing that does with a backing that has a dark color. So when it's really sunny out, it absorbs all of the light through the window. So that's what I have in a couple of the rooms that I spend a majority amount of time in.
Oh,
But
that's a good idea to work with the coloring even. Thank you. For
and
absorbing the heat. Yeah.
And listen, these are suggestions and techniques that are people have been using for hundreds of years. It's just we forget about them. It was the idea of having smart thermostats that turn themselves on and off. People are acting like, it's the next best thing. And it's like people were doing that. They just closed the grates in those rooms. So, it's sometimes those things, they actually really make the biggest difference when it comes to, which I think a lot of people have a problem, and I know we're over time, which comes to things like personal comfort. So we all want to, reduce the amount of energy we're spending, but a lot of people don't want to give up that comfort. And sometimes those little changes or those techniques, that really does make a difference. Things like draperies or things like draperies or closing off, different portions of the house. It really does make a difference in the personal comfort area.
Thank you very much, Marina. I really appreciated everything you had to say, and I'll definitely have the links that you mentioned out to everyone. And thank you to everyone who took time out of your day to come and attend this. Is there any last comments you'd like to make?
Thanks.
Violet,
Thanks so
when you
much for hosting this.
Yeah, Violet, when you have if I will send you a copy of my presentation, but please feel free to send my contact out. So if anybody has any questions, they can reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to chat about anyone's historic house.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And I hope that everyone here has a wonderful night. I'm going to go ahead and close things down now.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you.
Goodbye.